this is Jane, your diplomacy nerd. I made this film to discuss the international politics in Northeast Asia. I particularly would like to focus on Korean Peninsula first. Well, you might not be used to this topic, but two Koreas, South Korea and North Korea, were profoundly affected by the power politics among the world's major military powers. At the same time, two Koreas had grown much to influence the international norms and international order. First topic I would like to discuss is the international trade dispute going around between South Korea and Japan. Major newspapers and broadcasts have been covering this for a month. So what is going around? Effective from July 4th, Japan has prolonged its exporting process of three critical chemicals. The name was really hard to memorize. Photoresist, fluorinated polyamide, and hydrogen fluoride gas. These three materials were used to produce semiconductors and high-tech machines, which covered 90% of the international market. This hurt the South Korea's major high-tech giants such as Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix hard because they usually bought their critical materials from Japanese companies. This not only affected South Korea's economy, but also the international supply chain. Well, the effect is not showing immediately, but it may show because it will prolong its exporting process to maximum 90 days or furthermore. So we still don't know how the influence would end up, but we all know that economy depends on uncertainty. So Japan excluded South Korea from the white list on those three exporting chemicals. Well, whitelist countries are those countries were considered to be trustworthy for Japan, and they are exempt from heavy exporting process. Korea is the only Asian country to be listed on this white list. So why did Japan exclude South Korea all of a sudden? Well, the trade dispute seems to escalate into a trade war right now. Japanese government is planning to enlarge their export curb against South Korea from 3 materials to approximately 850 materials. They are planning to completely exclude South Korea from their white list and claim that South Korean government is no longer trustworthy or diplomatically intimate to Japan. Well, Japan claimed these measures were made for security concern, but they never specify what these concerns are. Japanese conservative newspaper and broadcast only reported that there are some concerns that South Korea have given access to North Korea for internationally sanctioned goods, but that wasn't the government statement. It was only some kind of speculation and accusation. And South Korea denied the accusation within an aggressive manner. Well, if you look over the documents made by METI, Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, as well as Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's comment, the current ongoing diplomatic disputes, particularly focused on history issue, seem to be the immediate trigger for their drastic restriction. The very first thing we can talk about is the South Korea's court ruling that ruled Japan's biggest steel maker, Nippon Steel, to compensate for South Korean forced labor survivors with $89,000 each. Well, Japan warned South Korean government not to enforce this ruling based on the treaty made in 1965. The bilateral treaty between South Korea and Japan made in 1965 states that the compensation issue has been finalized between the two countries. But the problem is this: it did not specify much about the individual rights to ask compensation to the private sectors. So actually the court ruling was related to individual rights to ask companies where exploited South Korean laborers during the colonization period. South Korean governments have been claiming that this ruling does not shake or either hurt the legality of the bilateral treaty that normalizes the relationship between South Korea and Japan. But Japanese government have been arguing that the Grand Court ruling made by South Korea shakes the basic grounds for this bilateral treaty. Well, if you look over the diplomatic documents made between South Korea and Japan, it's pretty much interesting though, because it was Japan that did not recognize that this bilateral treaty specifies the individual right and does not specify or does not deal with individual rights to ask for compensation, while South Korean government was the one pursuing that this bilateral treaty must treat individual rights to ask for compensation. So all of a sudden, after 54 years of this treaty, two countries' position kind of shift. I know, it's very interesting, right? But anyways, this Grand Court ruling cannot affect two countries' relations all of a sudden, right? And that's not even Japan's position on this drastic measure. If you look back, there has been historic disputes and some rough moments between South Korea and Japan. Well, first, it looms large that Prime Minister Abe have been blaming South Korean government for revoking the Conformation Accord made in 2015. Conformation Accord was made by South Korean and Japanese government in 2015 to compensate, respect the Conformation victims. During the colonization period, Japanese government ran a brothel business and dragged, and forced South Korean women to comfort Japanese militants in sexual terms. Anyways, the deal was made, but the problem was this. There was a phrase stating that this accord is finalized and it cannot be reversed. I said that this accord was made to honor and respect and compensate the Conformation victims. So the basic assumption of the accord is that this accord should make Japanese government and South Korean government to remember and apologize for what has happened during the colonization rule. But Japanese government rather fixated on the fact that this accord finalizes the dispute. South Korean citizens were not able to agree with this accord because they weren't able to feel the sincerity of Japan's apology. Korean administration under President Moon Jae-in restructured the accord by disbanding the institution made by South Korea and Japan. Japan paid approximately 1 billion yen to this institution to compensate for comfort women individuals. But because many people felt that Japan were simply forgetting about the damage they have caused after paying this money, decided to keep 1 billion yen to use in a different way and disband the institution and remodel the institution in a way the Conformation victims would prefer. But Japanese government is claiming that this is the revoke and this is breaking the international agreement. And they also claim that a Korean naval ship allegedly aimed its radar to lock in on Japanese plane. So historic disputes between South Korea and Japan was like ongoing thing for several years. Well, since the bilateral treaty that normalized two countries, interpretation of wartime crime and colonization was controversial. Things are going ugly ever since Japan decided to export curves against South Korea. South Korean citizens are boycotting Japanese goods. And not only that, Japan is now saying that they will enlarge their export curbs against South Korea from 3 materials to 850 materials. Damage by Japan's restriction has been limited so far, but if this restriction goes long, it will eventually hurt South Korea's economy as well as the international market. At the same time, this will hurt Prime Minister Abe's reputation and Japan's image because it reflects that Japan no longer stands for international free trade or fair play because they are not specifying the very reason for them to exclude South Korea from their white list. So this is self-destructive measure for Prime Minister Abe to make. At the same time, historic disputes going around between South Korea and Japan will never end up by these economic measures and economic restrictions. Well, I still believe there is a room for diplomacy. South Korean government and Japan built a special relationship for 54 years. Our relationship have been strong. Despite of disputes, we have improved human rights through making agreements. Murayama Doctrine, Abe Doctrine, Koizumi Doctrine are all the doctrines made by Japanese prime ministers to apologize and compensate for the damage caused by Japan's colonization. At the same time, South Korean government also respected these doctrines and tried to improve relationship with Japan and further improve the implementation to human rights through diplomacy. We did not antagonize Japan economically. We did not antagonize Japan within diplomatic terms. No agreement can be final, irreversible, or done once and for all. We have to move step by step. We have to talk step by step to find negotiating points and further develop and improve our relationship. Are we ready for that? So what kind of agreements can be made new? Well, first we have to see what limits we bear on the very treaty which normalized the bilateral relationship between South Korea and Japan. I have the diplomatic records related to this, and I actually would like to discuss next time. So, did you enjoy briefing and discussing the topic? What kind of ideas do you have? I would like to listen to your ideas, your thoughts, and try to find resolutions. Thank you for listening and thank you for sharing. This is your diplomacy nerd, Jane. See you next time. Bye.